I'm an animal person. Always have been. Truth be told, I prefer animals to people. I've always been so shy and, well, when you're as shy and awkward as I am, it's pretty tough to make connections with people. After a while, you just forget to care or try and, well, there you are, a total loner. My mom was a big animal person. I grew up with animals always coming and going from our house. She'd foster anything that needed a home. We had some pretty interesting creatures come through our doors over the years. We've had the classics, of course, cats and dogs. We also had hamsters, mice, snakes, guinea pigs, ferrets, chinchillas, birds, well, you name it, we had it. So for as long as I could remember, I've always been hanging out with animals. My mom used to volunteer at the local animal shelter too, and my favorite thing to do as a kid was to go with her. It sucked for the first bit because, well, we had to clean out all the cages and the litter boxes, but once we were done with that, we got to pet the animals, take the dogs out to play or go for a walk, or pretty much do whatever we wanted with the animals. The shelter became my happy place. If I was ever angry with the world or feeling isolated, which was pretty much all the time, I'd go there and I'd pet the animals. Everyone who worked there knew me and my mom by name, so I had special privileges and could handle the animals whenever. Of course, to adhere by the law, you were only allowed to have a certain number of animals in your house at one time, so we were always rotating them around. Our neighbors liked us, so we didn't really worry too much about being reported. Growing up, I didn't have any friends. I gave up trying to make friends when I was about 12. At that point, I hadn't been invited to a single play date or birthday party. Well, that should tell you something. The animals we fostered, the ones at the shelter, and of course my mom, they were all my family. They were my comfort. So I got more and more used to not talking to people and talking to animals instead. I even went to veterinary school to become a vet. I didn't much want to deal with pets' owners, though. There really wasn't much I could do about that. When I moved out on my own at the age of 21, I started fostering animals at my place, too. Now, me and my mom, we could help twice as many animals because we now had 2 residences. They were just blocks away from each other, too, so that we could easily help each other out with the animals. If a dog had to be let out or walked, we could share the duty. It worked pretty well. I'd really taken to fostering dogs specifically. I liked all animals, but had always felt a special kinship with dogs. Our local state-by-state laws stated that if you had a license to foster dogs, which I did, you could have a maximum of 5 in a household. The laws were as much to protect the rights of our neighbors and neighborhoods as they were about protecting the animals. Well, I stuck to the rules. I only ever had 5 at a time, just like my mom, and I'd been hearing rumors in the animal care circles that there was a large puppy mill in operation just outside of our town. Well, I decided to go undercover and investigate. I called the number that I'd been given by a patient's owner and made an appointment to go and view the pups. It was a long way out of town, over an hour's drive, but it really was out in the middle of nowhere, which that already raised a red flag for me right off the bat. The second I saw the place, I knew it was as bad as I had heard. It was completely inhumane, and I knew that I had to put a stop to that. Still, I held my rage in check and posed as an interested buyer. I told the guy that I owned a pet store in town and I was looking for a whole bunch of puppies. "Well, you've come to the right place," he said, through a wadded clump of chewing tobacco. He must have had 100 dogs there, puppies specifically. I mean, they were all sandwiched in tiny cages, too. I couldn't even count how many were stuffed into a single cage. I asked him how he got away with it, and he said that it was so far off the beaten track that he'd never had any trouble. Huh. Interesting, I said under my breath. Well, I told him that I was interested in the sickest of the lot. He asked me why, and I asked him if he really cared why. I told him I'd pay twice for the sick dogs what anybody would pay for a healthy one. Well, I knew his type. He was all about a quick buck, so he didn't really care. He wanted the money. He told me they currently had a pregnant black lab and 9 other sickly ones. Luckily, I had anticipated what I would find, and I knew that I'd want to liberate as many as I could on that first visit. Other than that, though, I really hadn't thought much further ahead. Suddenly, as I was driving down the highway with my vet practice van full of 10 yapping dogs, I realized that with the 4 I already had at home, I would be beyond, way beyond, the legal limit. I stopped at my mom's first and I told her where I'd been. My mom had a huge corner lot with a massive backyard perfect for running all the dogs. Luckily, she only had 2 at the time, so I was able to drop 3 off with her. I figured I could sneak another 2 into my place without anybody really noticing, and I knew that 1 was close to being adopted. Well, that left 5 still to find a place for. I knew I wanted the pregnant one with me, so I dropped her and the other one off at my place and then headed back to my mom's to see what she thought and what I should do with the other dogs. I realized in that moment that it really sucked not having friends. A normal person could have just dialed up a buddy or 2 and asked if they could swing by and help him out. I couldn't do that, though. All of my friends were dogs. My mom, however, did have friends, human ones. We didn't want the dogs being taken to a shelter because, well, that place was overcrowded as it was, so she found a friend of hers and we dropped the others there until we could find homes for the rest of the dogs, move them out, and get more room. Well, I couldn't sleep that night, thinking about that puppy mill and those conditions for those poor animals. My mom said the same thing when I talked to her in the morning. She said she wanted to drive up with me and get another 10. We both agreed, and we weren't worried about the law anymore. We'd done things by the book our entire lives, but the law had failed these animals, and now it was our job to help. Before driving out, we stopped at the police station so they could address us to the proper channels to report the puppy mill. Once we went through all of that, we headed out to the mill. We wanted to get as many dogs out of there as we could before the place was seized. Who knew where those dogs would end up after that? Probably in more places like that one in the end. There was a different guy there this day. This one seemed a little smarter, maybe. He was the mastermind of the operation, I think. He was definitely asking a lot of questions and wondering what was with the van and why we'd want so many dogs at once. Well, my mom said that she owned a pet store and that they were low and that I was her son and I'd come along for the ride. He was looking us up and down suspiciously, but gestured for us to follow him. Once we worked out the price for the 10 pups, we started talking about which ones we wanted. The guy was passing the ones we pointed to out of the pen when he paused suddenly and he seemed to be listening for something. And then I heard it, the faint sound of sirens in the distance, getting closer and closer and louder and louder. "I knew it!" he yelled and took off. I was in shock. Could that really be the police so quickly? They must have been right behind us from the time we left the station. Well, we went out to greet them. They were there because of our report, along with the state bylaw and Animal Protection Service officers. They stepped out of their vehicles and they looked around with disgust on their faces. We told them we were the ones who had reported the place in the first place, and when the officer that we'd spoken to earlier came from the back of the line, I said, "Gee, you didn't waste any time, did you?" "Not when it comes to man's best friend," he said. So the pups were liberated. All the appropriate measures were being taken to disperse the pups to safe homes and shelters. My house was certainly crowded. I now was back at the legal limit of 5 dogs, including that pregnant black lab that I'd gotten that first trip to the mill. The other sickly dogs I'd cared for in the vet and then found good homes for. 2 weeks after the big puppy mill bust, the police officer I'd made the report to stopped by my house. I'd forgotten some information on my statement or something, so he stopped by in order to fill out all the blanks. He stepped inside my house and I instantly felt uncomfortable. I never had people other than my mom in my house. I realized, not surprisingly, that along with no social skills comes no hosting skills. He was still awkwardly standing in the entrance while I was trying to decide if I should offer to take his coat, something to eat, drink, sit. How do you do this? He said, "This won't take but a minute. Maybe we could just take a seat at the table there," he said, gesturing towards the table. I said, "Yeah, sure, okay." That was all I could muster. He was asking me to go over a few things when all of a sudden we heard such a racket coming from the back of the house I had to go check. I walked down the long hallway to the room that I had for the dogs. I opened the door and, to my great surprise, I saw that the black lab from the puppy mill was no longer pregnant. She had her puppies, and there were 6 little squirming furballs all vying for their mommy's milk. The other dogs were barking at these new arrivals, and it was terribly loud. Before I realized it, the officer was standing beside me looking into the room as well. He looked serious and said, "Am I really seeing what I'm seeing here?" "I don't know," I said. "What do you think you're seeing?" He said, "Well, by my rough math skills, I'd say you have over the legal amount of dogs in your household." I looked and counted, just as he had. "Yep, 11 dogs now." "You gotta be kidding," I said. "Clearly you can see that only a few moments ago I was within the limit." He looked at me and said, "Hey, the law is the law." He arrested me right there on the spot. I was allowed to phone my mom and get her to come over and care for the pups while I was getting fingerprinted. Just another example of why I like animals better than people. I can't believe I was arrested for rescuing a dog. To watch more animated story videos like this, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments section what you thought about this story.